She was sitting on the roadside with two children in her arms, dirty, exhausted, and invisible to the world. But then, a black SUV stopped. A man stepped out, and everything changed. Have you ever wondered what would happen if someone from your painful past suddenly returned, not to hurt you, but to offer you a second chance? This isn't just a story about poverty or pain. It's about rising from the lowest point in life to rediscover dignity, love, and healing, step by step. In the next few minutes, you'll witness a journey that begins with heartbreak and ends with hope. A story of a forgotten woman, a quiet man who remembered her, and the powerful truth that second chances often come when we least expect them. So sit back, open your heart, and let this emotional true tale of Amaka show you that it's never too late to rebuild your life. What if the person you once loved and admired was suddenly at your feet, dirty, hungry, and unrecognizable? Would you walk away or stop everything? Robert wasn't expecting anything unusual that morning. From the comfort of his sleek black SUV, the wealthy businessman scrolled through emails and reports as his driver inched through Lagos traffic. It was just another day, until it wasn't. As the car dipped into a pothole, Robert casually glanced up, and that's when time seemed to freeze. There, by the roadside, slumped beneath a dusty tree, sat a woman with two small children clinging to her sides. Her clothes were ragged, her hair tangled, and her face stirred something inside him. She looked familiar, achingly familiar. Robert squinted, heart thudding. Could it really be her? "Pull over," he instructed, voice tight. As he stepped onto the pavement, the harsh city noise faded into the background. His expensive shoes clicked against the concrete as he approached the woman slowly, cautiously, like someone walking into a memory. And then she looked up. Her eyes, once vibrant, now clouded with sorrow, met his, and his breath caught in his throat. It was Amaka. Once the brightest star in school, Amaka had been untouchable. She walked hallways with confidence, surrounded by admirers. Robert had been just a quiet boy in the back row, invisible to her then, yet hopelessly drawn to her light. He had never forgotten her. But this version of Amaka was unrecognizable, worn, fragile, and shielding her children with the protective instinct of someone who had known too much pain. "Amaka," he whispered. She flinched, slowly lifting her head. "Robert?" she replied, voice cracked and unsure. The shock on both sides was mutual. Gone was the confident schoolgirl. In her place was a mother barely hanging on, her arms wrapped around her sons like life vests in a storm. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The city moved around them, cars honking, people yelling, but in that space between them, everything else faded. Robert's heart twisted. This wasn't just any woman. This was someone he had admired, someone who had unknowingly left an imprint on his life. And now, she was broken, sitting in the dust with two hungry children. He couldn't walk away. Not now. "Let me help you," he said softly. But Amaka recoiled, shielding her boys. "Just go." He didn't. He stood firm, eyes searching hers. He saw the past and present collide in that moment, and something else too. A second chance. That day everything changed, not just for Amaka but for Robert too. What began as a random glimpse from a car window became the beginning of a story neither of them could have imagined. She once believed love would save her. But what happens when love disappears and leaves you with nothing except two hungry mouths and a heart full of regret? Amaka's story wasn't always this broken. There was a time when she believed in promises, when her heart fluttered at late-night texts and sweet whispers of a future she couldn't wait to build. His name was Amika, charming, confident, and full of dreams that seemed just within reach. He talked about forever, about a beautiful home, about their children laughing in sunlit gardens. And Amaka, young and in love, believed him. But fairy tales don't always last. The moment she told Emeka she was pregnant, the atmosphere shifted. He smiled, yes, but it didn't reach his eyes. Slowly, he started pulling away. Calls went unanswered. Messages were left on read. And then, just like that, he was gone. No note, no goodbye, just silence. Left to face the storm alone, Amaka turned to the only place she thought might offer safety, her family. But tradition can be cruel. Her father, humiliated by what he called her shame, slammed the door in her face. Her mother cried, but remained silent, powerless beneath her husband's wrath. With no job, no income, and no roof, Amaka walked into a world that had no place for her. She tried everything. She cleaned houses, sold water on street corners, begged for leftovers outside markets. And through it all, her belly grew heavier, and so did her despair. When the twins were born, they didn't arrive into warmth. They came into cold nights on borrowed floors, their cries muffled by the fear of being evicted again. Still, Amaka endured. She wrapped her babies in second-hand blankets and fed them whatever scraps she could find. She became a shield, against hunger, against cold, against hopelessness. But even shields grow weak with time. There were days she didn't eat just so her sons could. Nights she sat awake, holding them tightly under broken roofs, whispering that tomorrow might be better, even when she no longer believed it. What broke her heart most wasn't the pain. It wasn't the hunger or rejection. It was the look in her children's eyes, wide, hollow, and too quiet for their age. Children should laugh. Hers barely smiled. And yet, she didn't give up. She stood at traffic lights with a cardboard sign, hoping someone would care. She hid her tears when strangers passed by without looking. And every time someone tossed her a coin, she whispered a silent thank you, not for herself, but for the two little boys who depended on her for everything. So, when Robert, an old classmate from a past life, stood before her offering help, Amaka wasn't just hesitant. She was terrified. Help always came with a price, and she had paid enough. But deep inside, a tiny voice whispered, maybe, just maybe, this time is different. She said no. She said she didn't need help. But when one of her children cried out in hunger, pride had to step aside, and a miracle began. Robert didn't expect resistance, not like this. As he stood in front of Amaka, her shoulders hunched and trembling, two wide-eyed boys clinging to her sides, all he wanted to do was help. But help, he quickly learned, is not always welcomed with open arms, especially not when someone has built their life around surviving alone. "I'm fine," she whispered, eyes cast downward, voice barely audible over the noise of passing cars. "We'll manage." But nothing about her or the children said, "Fine." Her hands trembled as she pulled the boys closer, shielding them as if Robert was a threat. Her body language screamed mistrust, fear, and years of self-reliance forged through pain. She wouldn't meet his eyes, not because she didn't recognize him, but because she didn't recognize herself anymore. Robert didn't flinch. He knelt down, ignoring the dust that clung to his trousers. "Amaka, look at them," he said gently, nodding toward her sons. One boy rubbed his eyes with the back of his hand, while the other sat quietly, his small hand resting on his empty stomach. "They're not okay." She bit her lip, torn. Her maternal instinct screamed louder than her pride. She had sworn never to rely on anyone again, especially not someone from a past she barely remembered with fondness. But the sound that came next shattered her defenses, a soft, hungry cry from her youngest. His voice was weak, but the pain in it echoed like thunder in her heart. Robert didn't push, he didn't lecture. He simply said, "Let me help, just for tonight. A warm meal, a place to sleep." Amaka's lips parted, but no words came. Her body tensed as if saying yes would break her completely. But her boys, they were tired. Their small eyes begged for comfort, for warmth, for hope, and finally, she nodded. "Just for tonight," she whispered. Robert exhaled with quiet relief and offered his hand. She hesitated, then stood on her own. He didn't mind. He walked beside her, not ahead, not dragging, not demanding, just present. Back at his home, Amaka stood frozen at the threshold. The glow of warm lights, the softness of the air, the smell of food cooking, it all felt too clean, too far from the world she knew. The twins clung to her skirt, overwhelmed by the space and safety. Dinner was served: jollof rice, fried plantains, pepper soup. Her sons didn't wait. They dove in with innocent joy, their little hands eager and messy. Amaka sat still for a while, watching them, tears building behind her eyes. She hadn't seen them this happy in months, maybe longer. Robert didn't press her to eat. He only slid a glass of water toward her and said, "Take your time." She finally lifted her spoon. One bite, and the tears came. But they weren't just from sadness. They were from something deeper. Relief. Gratitude. The unfamiliar feeling that maybe, just maybe, they were safe now. She thought she was too broken to start over. But one chance, one quiet act of belief, was all it took to rewrite her story. Amaka never imagined she'd walk into an office again, let alone as an employee. The polished floors, the hum of air conditioning, the gentle clicks of keyboards and confident strides of coworkers, it all felt foreign, like stepping onto a stage she didn't belong to. Her heart thudded in her chest as she stood beside Robert at the entrance of his company. He turned to her with a soft smile. "You'll be fine," he said. "Just take it one day at a time." Those words were simple, but for Amaka, they were everything. It had been years since anyone believed she was capable of more than just surviving. Years since someone looked at her and saw potential instead of pity. Yet, as she stepped inside and was introduced to the staff, she could feel their eyes on her. Some polite, some curious, and a few silently judgmental. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why was she here? The questions echoed in her own head. But she didn't run. Not this time. The first week was brutal. Amaka struggled with the office routines. She fumbled with the computer, forgot file names, and had to ask for help more often than she wanted to. Every mistake felt like confirmation that she didn't belong. More than once, she hid in the restroom just to catch her breath and gather her courage. But Robert was always there, not hovering, not controlling, but watching quietly, stepping in when she truly needed him. One afternoon, when a customer raised their voice over a misplaced order, Amaka braced for failure. But she stayed calm, listened, and offered a solution. When the customer left satisfied, Robert appeared beside her and said, "You handled that like a pro." Her lips lifted, almost involuntarily. It was the first real smile she'd allowed herself since she started. Back at home, the boys were thriving. They woke up smiling, giggling through breakfast, and hugging Robert tightly before school. They no longer cried themselves to sleep or asked why the sky was their ceiling. They had a bed, a routine, a future. Amaka often watched them in quiet awe. How quickly they had bloomed once given a little light. And slowly, she began to believe the same could happen for her. Each day at work became easier. She asked smarter questions, made fewer mistakes, and even started mentoring a new intern. Her confidence returned, not all at once, but piece by piece. Like rebuilding a house with bricks that once seemed too broken. One evening, as she sat at her desk reviewing files, she caught her reflection in the glass. Her posture was straighter, her eyes clearer. She didn't look like the woman who once begged on the roadside. She looked like someone rebuilding her life, and doing it well. And the most beautiful part? She wasn't doing it alone anymore. He left without a word. Years later, he barged into their lives like nothing happened. But this time, she wasn't the same woman he once abandoned. The peace that Amaka had finally begun to build came crashing down the moment Amika reappeared. It started with whispers, street rumors, murmured conversations in bars. A man who once disappeared without explanation was now asking questions, poking around, trying to find the woman he had once left to suffer. When Amika finally stood in the hallway of Robert's office, arrogance in his eyes and fury behind his voice, it was clear he hadn't come to apologize. He had come to reclaim. "I want to see my sons," Amika declared, barging into the room without so much as a knock. Robert looked up from his desk, calm but cold. "Who are you?" he asked, though something in his gut already knew the answer. "I'm their father," Amika said, "and I have a right to them." Those words hit the air like thunder. Robert stood slowly. His voice, though level, carried the weight of restrained fury. "You're the man who left Amaka with nothing but 2 hungry children and a shattered life, and now you want to talk about rights." Before the conversation could escalate, the door opened again, and Amaka walked in. She froze. Her breath caught. In front of her stood the man who once promised forever, who vanished when things became real. Her hands clenched involuntarily, and her voice shook as she spoke. "You don't get to call yourself their father. You left. You never came back." Emeka stepped forward. "I made mistakes, Amaka, but they're still my children." "No," she replied firmly. "They're my children. I'm the one who held them through sickness and hunger. I'm the one who stayed when you ran." Amika's eyes darted to Robert, his voice rising. "Is this what this is? You trying to replace me?" Robert didn't flinch. "I'm not replacing anyone. I stepped in when no one else would, when you should have." Amaka took a deep breath, eyes locked on Amika. She had spent years afraid of this moment, of confrontation, of judgment, of reopening wounds. But now, standing in a place of safety, with her children thriving and her strength rebuilt, she realized something powerful. She no longer needed his validation. "You made a choice," she said. "You don't get to come back just because you feel left out now. You lost your place the day you walked away." Emika's voice cracked. "They're mine." She stepped closer. "No, they are mine, and they are happy, and I will never let you hurt them again." Silence fell. Emika looked from Robert to Amaka and saw clearly. The door was closed. Not out of revenge, but out of protection. He had lost the right to belong in the life he once abandoned. And as he turned and walked away, alone, Amaka exhaled, not with fear, but with relief. The past had come knocking, but this time, it didn't break her. She thought her heart had shut forever, but love doesn't always come loud. It sometimes comes gently, patiently, and waits until you're ready. Love was the last thing on Amaka's mind. After everything she had been through, the betrayal, the loneliness, the crushing fear of never being enough, she had quietly convinced herself that love was a luxury meant for other people. Not for broken women, not for mothers who had begged on the streets. Her heart had become a shelter for survival, not romance. But Robert wasn't like anyone she had known before. He didn't force anything. He didn't try to win her over with grand gestures or empty words. Instead, he simply stayed. He was consistent in a world that had offered her nothing but unpredictability. He listened. He respected her space. He treated her children like they were his own. Every evening she would find him reading with the boys, answering their endless questions with the patience of a man who truly cared. She'd hear their laughter echo down the hallway, and sometimes, when she allowed herself, she smiled quietly from the kitchen, watching from afar. It was during one of those evenings, as they sat outside under the warm glow of dusk, that Robert finally spoke the words she had not dared to expect. "Amaka," he said gently, "I need to tell you something." She looked up, unsure. "I have loved you for a long time," he said, his voice steady, "but this time, I want you to choose me. Not because I helped you, not because I gave you a home, but because you see me." Amaka's heart raced. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't sure if she could ever be. Her voice trembled as she replied, I don't know what to say. Then don't, Robert said, smiling softly. Just listen. I'm not asking for an answer tonight. I'm just telling you how I feel. It wasn't pressure. It was honesty. In the days that followed, Amaka wrestled with her emotions. Every part of her wanted to believe this was real, that someone could love her not in spite of her pain, but because they understood it. But fear is a heavy chain, and hers had been forged through years of disappointment. Still, the more she watched Robert, the more she saw what love was supposed to look like. It was in how he never raised his voice, how he never made her feel small, how he included her in decisions about the boys, even when she doubted her worth. It was in the little things, how he waited for her at the dinner table, how he learned what made her smile, how he never flinched at her vulnerability. And one quiet evening, with the children already asleep and the house wrapped in a gentle calm, she looked at him and whispered, I see you now, Robert, and I think, I love you too. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he reached for her hand and held it with the same patience that had brought her back to life. In that silence, something old ended and something beautiful began. They cast her out in shame. Now, years later, she stood before them, not broken, but stronger, loved and ready to forgive. But were they ready to face her truth? Amaka never thought she'd return to her father's house, not after everything, not after the night he slammed the door in her face and told her she was no longer his daughter. That night had shattered something in her, something deeper than pride. But time has a strange way of folding the past into the present, and sometimes healing comes from places we least expect. It was Robert who suggested the visit. Not for them, he said, holding her hand. For you. For peace. She resisted at first. The memory was still sharp, the wound still tender, but something inside her, softened by love and the quiet strength she'd rediscovered, whispered that it was time. They made the journey together, Robert, Amaka, and the boys. When they stepped into the village compound, everything felt smaller than she remembered. The house, the trees, even the space between her and her childhood. Her mother was the first to see them. Tears streamed down her face before a word was spoken. She ran to Amaka, embracing her so tightly that years seemed to collapse into that one moment. My daughter, she sobbed. I've missed you every day. Then came her father, older now, slower. His eyes held shame, not anger. Amaka, he said, voice trembling. I was wrong. I let my pride destroy what mattered most. Can you forgive me? Amaka's hands shook. So many nights she had replayed this scene in her mind, sometimes in anger, sometimes in sorrow. But now, with her sons beside her and Robert standing tall and proud, she didn't feel small anymore. Yes, Papa, she said, voice cracking. I forgive you. The days that followed were filled with warmth, tears, and unexpected laughter. Her parents marveled at the boys, doted on them, and begged for the chance to make things right. Then Robert, in his calm, respectful tone, stepped forward and made his intention known. I love your daughter, he said, and I want to marry her if you'll give us your blessing. Amaka's father looked at her, eyes glassy. She nodded, tears brimming, and for the first time in years, he smiled with genuine joy. The traditional wedding that followed was more than a ceremony. It was a celebration of redemption. Drums echoed across the village as women danced in colorful wrappers, and the smell of jollof rice, fried meat, and palm wine filled the air. Amaka, adorned in a radiant native outfit, glowed with a beauty that came from deep healing. Robert stood proudly at the front, his eyes locked on hers. When she reached him, he whispered, You look like the woman I always knew you were. she smiled. "And you look like the man I never expected, but always needed." As her father placed her hand in Robert's, his voice was thick with emotion. "Take care of her. She's stronger than she knows." That night, as laughter and music filled the air, Amaka sat beside the man she loved, surrounded by family that had once turned away, and children who had finally found a home. For the first time in her life, everything felt whole. Not every happy ending is loud. Sometimes, it's the quiet mornings, the laughter of children, and the peace in your chest that tells you, you've finally come home. Life after the wedding didn't feel like a fairy tale. It felt better, real, warm, imperfect, and honest. For Amaka, waking up in a home filled with safety and love still felt like a quiet miracle. There were no more nights listening for footsteps in alleyways, no more hushed lullabies to hungry children. Now there were sleepy giggles from across the hall, fresh breakfasts in a sunlit kitchen, and gentle kisses from a husband who always asked, "How are you today?" and meant it. Robert had remained the man she fell in love with, thoughtful, patient, consistent. But now, as her husband, he stepped even deeper into his role as a father. The twins no longer called him Uncle Robert. They called him Daddy, and it felt completely natural. Ifemji and Abub would run to him after school, waving their notebooks, eager to show off drawings and spelling tests. Robert always made time, always knelt down to their level, always listened. In return, they worshipped him. Amaka often stood in the doorway, arms crossed, a smile tugging at her lips as she watched the three of them play with toy cars on the living room floor or build pillow forts taller than the couch. There were moments, tiny, unspoken ones, where her eyes welled with tears, not from sadness, but from healing. Because somewhere between the hospital visits, the job training, the traditional wedding, and the messy weekday mornings, she had become someone new. No longer the desperate woman sitting on the roadside, no longer the abandoned girl crying into silence. She was a mother, a wife. A woman loved not for what she could offer, but simply for who she was. Of course, life still had its imperfect days. There were dishes left unwashed, tantrums from tired toddlers, and evenings when she doubted herself. But now, she had someone to lean on. When she felt overwhelmed, Robert would wrap her in his arms and remind her, "You're doing amazing, Amaka. Don't forget that." She didn't need grand gestures anymore. The small things were enough. The hot cup of tea left for her on the nightstand, the school notes Robert pinned proudly on the fridge, the sound of her children giggling in their sleep. These were the things that stitched her heart back together. One night, after tucking the boys into bed, Amaka stood beside Robert on the balcony. The stars were bright. The city lights blinked in the distance, but everything around her felt still. Safe. "Are you happy?" Robert asked quietly, slipping his arm around her waist. She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. "More than I ever thought I could be." And it was true. She didn't have to look over her shoulder anymore. She didn't have to fight alone. She had found not just love, but peace. The kind that doesn't announce itself, but settles quietly into your bones. Amaka's story didn't end with a rescue. It began with one. And now she was exactly where she was always meant to be. Home. Her story didn't start with perfection. It started with pain. But what if the pain is just the doorway to a better, deeper kind of love? Amaka's journey wasn't about being saved. It was about becoming whole again, bit by bit, moment by moment. Her story reminds us that life doesn't hand out perfect beginnings. Sometimes it hands us heartbreak, betrayal, and silence. But even from the darkest places, something beautiful can grow, if we choose not to give up. She had every reason to stop believing. Abandoned by love, rejected by family, Forced to raise two children with nothing but her will and her tears, Amaka had faced a level of suffering most people wouldn't survive. But she didn't crumble. She adapted. She carried her pain like a quiet armor, not because she wanted to be strong, but because she had no other choice. And yet, when help finally came, she almost refused it. That's what pain does. It doesn't just hurt you, it teaches you not to trust, not to hope, not to dream. It teaches you to expect disappointment, even in kindness. That's why it took more than just generosity to reach her. It took consistency, patience, gentle love without strings. And that's exactly what Robert gave her. In a world that told her she was used, unworthy, and alone. He told her she mattered. He didn't try to fix her. He walked beside her while she learned to stand again. And that, perhaps, is the greatest kind of love. The kind that doesn't need to shine. It simply stays. The power of Amaka's story is not just in what she lost. It's in what she chose to rebuild. She didn't let her children grow up in the shadow of her pain. She let them laugh again, feel safe, and dream. She didn't let pride keep her from healing. She faced her past, forgave those who failed her, and opened her heart to a future she once thought impossible. And in doing so, she taught us something we all need to hear. You are never too broken to begin again. You are never too far gone to be seen, loved, and held, not just by someone else, but by yourself. Second chances aren't always dramatic. Sometimes they come quietly, in the form of a warm meal, a job offer, a bedtime story, a man who looks you in the eye and says, "I'm not going anywhere." That's how healing begins, not with fanfare, but with faith. So if you've ever felt like you're too damaged to matter, remember Amaka. Remember the mother who held her babies in the cold and still found a way to smile. Remember the woman who stood tall in the face of the man who abandoned her. Remember how she forgave her father, how she trusted love again. Her story proves that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "I'm still here." And that whisper is enough to change everything. Some stories don't just end, they echo. And hers? It's not about where she fell. It's about how she rose and who reached out to lift her. Can't say I'm in the end, Amaka's story isn't just about survival. It's about redemption. It's about the long, quiet road from heartbreak to healing, and how sometimes the person who helps you find your way back was there in the background all along. Her journey began in tears, but it didn't stay there. It moved through fear, uncertainty, humility, and finally into something far greater: peace. Amaka didn't need a prince. She didn't need rescuing in the way fairy tales often suggest. What she needed was someone who would sit beside her in the silence, not ask her to smile before she was ready, and walk beside her without ever making her feel less. And that's exactly what Robert did. He didn't come in with loud promises. He came in with actions that spoke softly, but deeply. He saw the worth in her long before she saw it in herself. What makes this story linger in the heart isn't just that she found love again, it's that she allowed herself to choose it. Even when she was afraid, even when she doubted. She stood in front of the man who had once been invisible in her world, and this time, she saw him for who he really was. Not a savior, but a partner, a protector, a man who didn't try to replace the past, but simply offered a future. She didn't forget where she came from. The dust still lived in the corners of her memory. The nights on the streets, the hungry cries, the judgmental stares. But now, those memories no longer held her hostage. They became her fire, her foundation, the roots beneath her strength. And the children? They thrived. The twins grew up knowing two things deeply: that they were loved, and that their mother was a warrior wrapped in grace. They never had to question if someone would show up for them, because Robert always did. They never had to wonder if a home meant safety, because Amaka made sure of it. Their laughter filled the halls that once echoed with silence. Their footsteps pattered across floors that had once been cold pavement, and their hearts grew up with security that was fought for, not given. It all came full circle the night Robert held Amaka close, looked into her eyes and said, "I never wanted to be your hero. I just wanted to walk beside you." She smiled through tears, because now she knew, love doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it waits, and when you're ready, it catches you. Amaka's story teaches us one of the most important lessons in life. Your past may shape you, but it doesn't have to define you. No matter how broken things seem, no matter how far you feel from hope, healing is still possible, love is still possible, and life can still surprise you. So if you've ever felt unworthy of a second chance, let this story remind you, the second chance might already be waiting. All you have to do is say yes. Life is not always smooth. There are times when we are abandoned, misunderstood, or stumble in the harsh currents of life. But Amaka's story reminds us that, no matter how much pain we have experienced, we can still stand up, still deserve to be loved, and can still start over. What matters is not how we lived in the past, but how we choose to face the present and open our hearts to the future. For the elderly, this lesson is even more meaningful. Because no matter how old we are, kindness, tolerance, and the desire for happiness always exist. Sometimes, just an open arm, someone willing to listen, is enough to heal old wounds. Believe that, no matter how tired life has been, true love and good things are always waiting for us at the end of the road. Don't be afraid to accept it, because it's never too late to start over and live a life worthy of your heart.